I'd like to finish up with a couple other bark beetle situations, all of which involve bark beetles in deciduous trees. So, as we've already seen, many, probably most bark beetles are associated with plants or use sometimes parts of plants that have some predisposing stress issue, be damaged or infected with some pathogen. And most, probably all, bark beetles have some association with fungi, and some they're quite close associations. And sometimes these bark beetle fungal associations can produce serious plant disease. So, one group I'd like to mention that's quite important in the High Plains, Rocky Mountain region are ash bark beetles, three species of which occur in ash trees. Uh, these are pretty standard in the way they approach plants. The adult goes in, uh, gets underneath the bark, and makes a gallery that scores fairly deeply into the inner bark and the wood of the tree. Then the eggs are laid along this, and the larvae develop perpendicular to that egg gallery the adult produces. They're usually found in limbs, but sometimes occur in the trunk of trees, and can, in rare cases, are involved in tree death, not just limb dieback. The on small diameter limbs, you might see holes, and when you think of bark beetles and you see holes, they're usually exit holes or maybe an entrance hole produced by the adult beetle. In this case, these are ventilation holes that will form over the egg gallery. And then the exit holes themselves will be much more irregularly patterned, and the diameter of the beetle that we're talking about, these fairly small ash bark beetles. Shot-hole borer is a beetle we talked about in the last section when we're talking about food crops, but it does show up in all stone fruits, be they ones that we are growing for fruit or for ornamental purposes. So stone fruits, genus Prunus. These will enter and make entrance holes, and then the adults, when they have emerged after developing as larvae in the bark, will also make holes. Often there's gum associated with this because Prunus does produce gum, sometimes sufficiently to kill the beetles. Larvae can successfully develop in twigs and branches that are in poor condition or have been recently killed. This is a borer that you might see just on part of the tree, a branch that's been compromised in some way and becomes more susceptible. But trees will become more susceptible in general as they age. So these usually come into stone fruit trees and on their last legs. The bark beetle themselves start an attack like other bark beetles by entering the tree and making that egg gallery. Often the trees will resist, and in the case of these prunus, they'll resist by producing copious amounts of gum. And if this can be extensive enough, it can often kill some of the invading beetles. Now I want to switch gears and talk about something perhaps maybe more than you care, but this is a situation, thousand cankers disease, that I've had some association with, and it's an unusual situation. It's a disease of trees, specifically walnut trees, mostly black walnut, and is an unusual situation that involves both an insect and a pathogen. So the beetle is the walnut twig beetle. The fungus, the partner in this, is got the scientific name Geosmithia morbida. The beetle, the walnut twig beetle, is a tiny beetle, much smaller than any of the kinds of bark beetles we've talked about. And despite its name, walnut twig beetle, in black walnut, the kind of walnut that is so valuable for wood in this country, it can develop in larger diameter branches. It certainly is not limited to the twigs. The larvae will develop within galleries they produce that are, again, more or less perpendicular to the central gallery produced by the adult. These will be sometimes in the outer layer of the wood, but also in areas of the bark as well. And this beetle is always contaminated with fungi at least in this part of the world. And it's this Geosmithia fungus. So in this picture, there's some beetles that have been exposed underneath the bark, pale colored beetles, plus they're covered with this white powder, those spores of the fungus. There's a pupa in here too, also covered with the spores of the fungus. So the fungus grows in association with this beetle. Here's a larva that I took out of the chamber to the right, and the chamber is got sporulating Geosmithia morbida in it. So the fungus we find always associated with the beetle, and both the fungus and the beetle are native to North America, as we'll get into. They're native to certain kinds of walnuts that grow in the southwestern part of the United States and in northern Mexico. So the fungus gets into the tree via the beetle. The beetle enters to make its egg gallery, or maybe to make a little wound to feed, but its body is covered with spores of the fungus. The spores are introduced in the wound and then grow from that point. So you get a dead area that grows, that is produced from the infection of the fungus. And when you get enough of these dead areas, these cankers, you'll get increasing effects on tree health. They'll coalesce and ultimately will deplete the tree in terms of how it can move nutrients around, and ultimately how it can move water. So multiple cankers are produced. So the disease, thousand cankers disease of walnut, is named because of an old torture called death by 1,000 cuts. So this is death by 1,000 or probably 1,000,000 small cankers. When you see thousand cankers disease in its full form, there might be first evidence that it's present by a limited amount of flagging, yellowing leaves scattered around the plant, and maybe the top looks a little thin, and maybe even a few wilted leaves. But this symptom is only produced after the condition is pretty far advanced, and the trees in the acute phase of this disease will rapidly then decline. So here's a tree, crown symptoms found in July 2009. The tree was completely dead the next year. A series of trees in an area of east area of Denver where there are no more trees left. They're all killed. They've all been killed. But back in 2008, this tree was present in this park. September of that year, it had some more dieback, and by the next year, in June, it was dead. So this is a fairly fast-acting disease when it's in its acute phase. And tree losses in areas of the western United States, if you look at the curves of percent of trees that have been removed as a result of this, track very well with Dutch elm disease for this area. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about this situation, in addition, is that it involves native insect, native fungus to the United States. The walnut twig beetle itself was first described from a specimen collected in southern New Mexico, and collected in 1896, described about 35 years later. So in that area where it was collected, what it was feeding on was a kind of walnut called Arizona walnut, Juglans major, that grows down there. A second kind of walnut that grows in Southern California, Juglans californica, the Southern California walnut, is also another original host. The problem is that this beetle, when it gets into a susceptible kind of walnut, like black walnut, the walnut is native to the eastern half of North America, the highly valuable walnut, it produces a disease condition that is far more aggressive than what you'd ever see in the native plants. So walnut twig beetle, when you go to Arizona and look at Arizona walnut, you can find it. You can find the fungus, but the attacks are limited to small diameter branches, twigs essentially, and are limited to those that have some sort of stress condition, overshaded or damaged. And so they function as many similar kind of beetles we call twig beetles, in that they are sort of a natural pruner, but never does it progress to a disease condition that would imperil the life of the tree. So, thousand cankers disease became a problem in black walnut, Juglans nigra, because it jumped from another kind of walnut, the walnuts that were growing in the Southwest, the Southern California walnut and the Arizona walnut. We put black walnut in their way. We grew black walnut in areas where it wasn't native, and we've moved it around, and the beetle and the fungus have spread to many points in the United States over the past 30, 40 years. Now, I want to take just a little side note because I think it's kind of interesting that the origin of this thousand cankers disease involved native species, at least native to North America, just moving on to a different plant. And this is a way of having produced new pests is perhaps neglected or forgotten because we have so many introduced ones from Asia and Europe. Anyway, some similar examples, though, that are homegrown pests that jump to us, the Colorado potato beetle. Very important pest to potatoes, but its native plant was another solanum species called buffalo burr that grows in arid areas of North America, Mexico, and the southwestern United States. People put potatoes in front of it, an eggplant, and they found they liked that too. And then they followed the plants to the east and then somehow got a ship and got onto the European mainland, where it's also a terrible, terrible problem. But some other examples, apple maggot, a key pest of apples. That's a native insect of North America, but it was native to hawthorn. And then when people started growing apple, it was first noted in the Hudson Valley in New York, started growing apple, some of them started to move onto apple. So same insect, just a different strain that developed a taste for a different plant. A new pest gets developed. And then the boll weevil, probably the most important agricultural insect in the history of the United States, damages cotton, is originally associated with a native cotton plant, wild cotton. And then when cultivated types came into the area, it found it liked those as well, started moving up through the cotton cultivation areas of Mexico into Texas and then spread throughout the South and devastated the cotton belt in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Anyway, getting back to this thousand cankers disease situation, it's a unique situation in that the disease condition involves sustained introductions of the fungus by the beetle. And it is a disease that really it's hard to describe because there is no one single actor that makes thousand cankers disease. It involves a beetle that introduces the fungus and does some tunneling on its own. That includes the fungus, which will spread and create a canker. But who's most important in this situation? You can't separate. They're both equally important. You have to have both to get full-blown acute phase thousand cankers disease. Unlike, say, Dutch elm disease, where the fungus is clearly the more important of the two partners. So I've used this phase, acute phase, and this phrase, acute phase of thousand cankers, and that's where when it comes in, you see this rapid death, where the top symptoms may show up 1 year and 2 years later the tree is dead. But the question comes, is that always the way thousand cankers disease develops? And is there a chronic phase where it maybe develops much more slowly or maybe even can recover? And yes, there is. It even occurs out here in the West where the disease tends to be so much more aggressive. So in this picture, there's a tree I've been watching for the last 8-10 years or so now. 8 years, I guess, in 2009. And in this park, this is the only one left. There are about 12 other trees that have all long since died, but this tree here is still hanging on in 2014, still hanging on in summer of 2017. Some die back, but it's pretty much stabilized. And it looks like in the eastern U.S., it's this disease is more this chronic phase, probably because the beetles and perhaps maybe the fungus just don't do as well there. And since you have to have sustained uh, uh, attacks on the tree, if the rate of attack is decreased, the, the disease is much less severe. Okay, and then the last situation involves a group of beetles, bark beetles, with a different habit. We call them ambrosia beetles. And these are bark beetles that develop on fungi. They are not they are not consuming the wood. They're consuming fungi. These fungi are called ambrosia fungi. The adults will carry it in, and the young will feed on the ambrosia fungi. So, in one classic kind of form, what you'll see is a pattern like this in the wood where the adult has gone in, may go straight into the hardwood, makes a central gallery, but alongside it are are cradles that the adult has cut out and will lay the eggs in those, and that's where they will develop. And do the larvae will not do tunneling. What they're feeding on are fungi. The fungi are illustrated in this picture by the dark areas, and so the adult brings the fungus in, the young feeds on the fungus. When you see ambrosia beetles in lumber and the like, they're usually quite small. Most of them are small. If you cut the wood, you might have little discolored areas and little pinholes. Uh, Ambrosia beetles as a group are almost always just found in a tree that's on its last legs or maybe even was recently cut. They're not very aggressive. Now, that being said, we have some ambrosia beetle problems happening right now in North America, but all of them involve introduced non-native ambrosia beetles. So one that's been around the longest is the granulated ambrosia beetle, or you'll sometimes still hear it called the Asian ambrosia beetle. This attacks a wide range of plants, hardwood plants, deciduous trees and shrubs. Can be a pretty significant problem in nurseries. When it does attack a tree, it will enter and as it's kicking out the sawdust, make that tunnel in which the larvae will be reared. The frass it produces comes out as tightly packed form that produces kind of toothpicks on toothpick-like projections off the trunk. So this is a beetle that is quite important on trees under stress, where this occurs mostly in the southeastern U.S. And mid-Atlantic states, but occasionally we'll take out trees that are in fair health as well. The adult in the picture on the left looks like it's going out, but you can see the tunnel it had made. The fungus colonizes that tunnel. The eggs are laid in that tunnel. There's eggs and larvae in the upper right, and they will feed in that tunneled area and be feeding on the fungus, not feeding on the wood. A little bit different with these ambrosia beetles. And then there's two exotic ambrosia beetles that have fairly recently entered the United States and are acting quite badly. So just briefly, one is called the polyphagous shot-hole borer, and it's associated with a fusarium species of fungus. The ambrosia beetle is a Eualcia species, perhaps maybe even two, with a fungal partner. Both of these are non-native, but they have been shown to act quite aggressively in many kinds of trees that occur here in North America: maples, oaks, willows, sycamore, among the more seriously attacked. This is presently in the Southern California area, and we'll see how long what this turns into. But it's just another small beetle, and there's an entry hole made by the adult. The adults will tunnel quite extensively. The tunnels will be colonized by fungi. When you get tunneling such as this, you can see decline of the trees. So in this case, it's a very heavily attacked box elder maple, one of the more susceptible trees. to this introduced insect and fungus. And then in the southeastern U.S., a quite serious situation involves the red bay ambrosia beetle and a disease that it is associated with called laurel dieback. So the red bay ambrosia beetle and laurel dieback involves this, again, exotic species not native to North America, Xyloborus cleparatus, the red bay ambrosia beetle, and a fungal partner. Both are non-native, and the fungus is proved to be extremely aggressive when it gets in trees of the laurel family, and the most seriously impacted has been red bay. Avocado, sassafras, pondberry are other laurel family plants that are considered to be at risk. This has mostly been in the southeast for a while, but it is now uh, spread broadly across the south, and it can be found in Texas as well. So again, a tiny beetle. How do these tiny beetles kill trees? It's the fungal partner. So in this case, we see on the lower left picture, toothpick like frass tubes. Again, that's the packed sawdust that the adult is pushing out the hole as it's making the tunnel for the larvae. And on the right, you can see staining, vascular staining that would be produced by the fusarium involved in laurel wilt. Internal tunneling, then this can move aggressively or can move systemically and cause staining of the vascular system, which in turn will cause the plant to wilt if they get plugged and it's compromised. Trees may be fatally infected by a single successful beetle attack. This is quite a serious problem. We'll see how it all plays out, but it is one of the newer bark beetle problems, and like the situation in Southern California, involves exotic species that have been accidentally introduced. Okay, I think we have now done with bark beetles. Let's move on to